Welcome to the Mystery and History channel. Be sure to subscribe and like so you don't miss out on more videos like this one. Charles City Courthouse, Virginia, July of 1862, taken from the book The Civil War Through the Camera, presents one of the many vivid records of the American Civil War. Located in Virginia, the courthouse was the setting for important moments during the 1862 campaign, when Union and Confederate troops moved intensely through the region. A moment of quiet expectation before one of the most emblematic clashes of the American Civil War. The Union soldiers, positioned on the banks of the Rappahannock, waited for the order to advance toward a battlefield that would become a symbol of both courage and tragedy. The Battle of Chancellorsville proved to be a strategic victory for Confederate General Robert E. Lee, but it had an immense human cost, marked by the sacrifice of thousands of lives. This striking photograph shows Confederate soldiers marching through Frederick, Maryland in 1862 during the height of the American Civil War. At that moment, Maryland, a border state with divided loyalties, was under Union control, and the sudden appearance of Confederate troops marked a bold incursion into enemy territory. The famous 13-inch mortar Dictator, photographed by David Knox on September 1, 1864, outside Petersburg, Virginia, was one of the most impressive weapons of the American Civil War. Mounted on a reinforced railroad platform, the giant 13-inch mortar was capable of launching shells of nearly 200 pounds to more than 1 1/4 miles. A group of American Civil War photographers gathered in a field near Berlin, Maryland, now Brunswick, between late September and early October of 1862. Among them is the renowned Matthew Brady, standing second from the right, one of the most important figures in 19th century documentary photography. The image, titled Death Gettysburg, preserved in the National Archives, number 503, shows the harsh reality of the Battle of Gettysburg, fought between July 1st and July 3rd, 1863, one of the bloodiest clashes of the American Civil War. The field, filled with the bodies of fallen soldiers, is a silent testimony to the human price paid during those 3 decisive days. The monument of the 13th Massachusetts Regiment is located on the Gettysburg battlefield in Pennsylvania and was erected to honor the soldiers who took part in the famous battle fought in July of 1863 during the American Civil War. General William T. Sherman in Washington, District of Columbia, in May of 1865, captures a singular historical moment just after the official end of the American Civil War. Sherman, famous for his march to the sea, appears wearing a black mourning band on his left arm in memory of President Abraham Lincoln, assassinated in April of that same year. During the Battle of Gettysburg in July of 1863, John L. Burns, a local cobbler of 69 years of age and a veteran of the War of 1812, decided to fight alongside Union soldiers. Armed with a borrowed rifle and dressed in his blue civilian coat, he joined sharpshooters from Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, taking an active part in the fighting. Abigail Hopper Gibbons, working in support efforts during the American Civil War, United States, 1864. The photo shows her involvement in assistance and organizational activities to help soldiers and civilians affected by the conflict. The record reflects the role of dedicated women in humanitarian missions at the time. The General Philip Henry Sheridan in a military camp during the 19th century in the United States. Sheridan was one of the leading officers of the Union Army during the American Civil War and became known for his leadership in decisive campaigns. shows a group of journalists gathered in a camp during the 19th century near improvised tents and a transport wagon bearing the words NYH Headquarters, indicating their connection to the press. The professionals appear seated under the shade of trees in a space organized for rest and work. American Civil War in the 1860s, portraying not only a historical moment, but also the strength and symbolism of an era marked by conflicts, transformations, and the rise of modernity amid the tragedy of war. D.W.C. Arnold, a private in the Union Army, had his image recorded and preserved in the National Archives, symbolizing the memory of the thousands of ordinary men who served during the American Civil War and whose dedication helped shape the destiny of the United States. The warship USS Miami of the United States Navy during the American Civil War, around 1862. The photograph shows the ship ready for naval operations and the patrolling of strategic rivers. Circa 1862, Potomac River. A notable scene from the American Civil War shows an improvised ferry made of boats covered with blankets being used to carry field artillery and soldiers across the Potomac River, revealing the ingenuity and urgency of military operations amid the logistical difficulties of the time. A caravan of troops from the Black Hills Expedition crosses the Missouri River in 1874 under Custer's command, opening the route that would lead to the gold rush and to conflicts with the Lakota peoples. The 96th Pennsylvania Infantry Regiment, 1861, was a unit of the Union Army formed at the start of the American Civil War. Recruited largely in Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania, the regiment was made up of volunteers who answered President Lincoln's call for troops. The Grand Review of the Union Army, held on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington District of Columbia in May of 1865, was one of the largest military parades in American history, celebrated a few days after the official end of the Civil War. For 2 days, about 200,000 Union soldiers marched before President Andrew Johnson, members of Congress, foreign diplomats, and the jubilant population of the capital. Sam A. Cooley in 1864 shows the interior of Fort Marion in St. Augustine, Florida, today known as Castillo de San Marcos. Originally built by the Spanish at the end of the 17th century, the fort was used during the American Civil War as a military prison and as a strategic Union post after the occupation of Florida. Alexander Gardner, taken in Richmond in 1865, portrays a group of freedmen, newly freed former enslaved people, shortly after the end of the American Civil War and the fall of the Confederate capital. The scene carries deep symbolism. Those who until recently lived under the weight of slavery were now free citizens, experiencing the first moments of a new life amid the ruins of a society marked by conflict. The image is powerful in its simplicity. A combatant marked by the trials of war holds firmly the national flag that, although torn and worn by battles, remains raised as a symbol of resistance and hope. The 8th Pennsylvania Reserve Regiment, formed by volunteers, fought in some of the most intense clashes of the American Civil War. A Zouave combatant, a member of one of the most distinctive and recognizable units of the American Civil War, known for uniforms inspired by North African styles, usually colorful and elaborate, in contrast with the stiffness of traditional military attire. This soldier, however, appears marked by the hard consequences of the conflict, carrying on his body the scars of war. B-26th United States Colored Volunteer Infantry, preserved in the National Archives, 533-126, represents a milestone in the history of the American Civil War and in the fight for freedom. Composed of African American soldiers, this regiment was formed after the Emancipation Proclamation and fought not only for the preservation of the Union, but also for the affirmation of their dignity and citizenship in a country still deeply marked by slavery. A field hospital of the American Civil War, set up near combat areas during the 1860s. These hospitals were organized in improvised ways, often in tents or adapted buildings, and aimed to provide quick care to wounded soldiers. Known as the Guy Brothers Union Soldiers, Library of Congress, Ambatine number 1327, is a rare and deeply human testimony of the American Civil War. The Guy brothers, dressed in their Union uniforms, pose side by side, reinforcing not only the family bond, but also the commitment. The portrait of the young Union soldier, preserved by the Library of Congress, Ambatine number 2068, reveals the face of a combatant still marked by youth, but already weighted by the Civil War that divided the United States. With an immaculate uniform and a fixed gaze, he symbolizes thousands of young men who left their families to fight in the name of the preservation of the Union. The celebrated photograph of Abraham Lincoln at Cooper Union, taken by Matthew Brady on February 27, 1860, is considered one of the most important images of his political path. Shown full length, with a serious and steady posture before the camera, Lincoln conveys the image of a confident and dignified statesman at a decisive moment in his career, shortly before becoming president. American Civil War portrays a group of formerly enslaved people, called at the time contrabands, who had fled slavery and sought protection behind Union lines. The term, although dehumanizing, marked a turning point in the conflict because those who had been treated only as property began to be recognized as a force capable of influencing the course of the war. Brigadier General Robert Houston Milroy, an officer of the Union Army during the American Civil War. Milroy became best known for his defeat at the Second Battle of Winchester in 1863, a defining setback in his military career. Union General Isaac Ingalls Stevens was photographed seated on a porch in March of 1862 near Beaufort, South Carolina. Before becoming a military leader during the American Civil War, Stevens had been the first governor of the Washington Territory, a role in which he showed administrative firmness and leadership. Mail wagon of the Second Corps, Brandy Station, Virginia. This photograph portrays the vital importance of correspondence during the American Civil War. The mail served as a precious link between the camps and battlefields and the families at home. The term headquarters refers to the command center or administrative seat of an institution, whether military, governmental, or corporate. In military contexts, the command center is the place where senior officers plan operations, coordinate troops, and centralize communications. In the American Civil War, detachments of African American soldiers were mobilized on different fronts, playing fundamental roles in direct combat and in strategic watch. This scene, recorded in November of 1864, shows a picket station of black troops near the Dutch Gap Canal in Virginia. Confederate General Robert E. Lee, shown in this image preserved by the Library of Congress, 88-155-1-1, is one of the most notable figures of the American Civil War, 1861–1865. Born in Virginia, Lee graduated from West Point and distinguished himself as a military engineer before the conflict. J. Coonley, taken on December 15, 1864, shows civilian spectators watching the Battle of Nashville in Tennessee, where Confederate forces under General John Bell Hood faced the Union Army, led by General George H. Thomas. Armory Square Hospital. Located in Washington, District of Columbia, Armory Square Hospital was one of the most important medical centers of the American Civil War, created to serve the enormous number of wounded arriving from the front line. Built near the Capitol, the hospital became known for its size and capacity to receive, taking in severely wounded soldiers coming mainly from battles fought in Virginia. (1861) shows the men of Company D, 1st Rhode Island Infantry Regiment, who weeks later would take part in the Battle of Bull Run, the first major clash of the American Civil War. The image, however, draws attention for several peculiarities. In the right corner, a wooden mallet appears forgotten at the feet of two soldiers. In the center, a 15-inch Rodman cannon at Battery Rogers near Alexandria draws attention not only for the impressive size of the artillery piece, but also for the curious details that compose it. At the top of the cannon's muzzle rests a large bird, possibly an eagle, a powerful symbol full of meaning for the United States amid the Civil War. A Union soldier who, unlike many of his companions who commonly posed proudly with weapons and military equipment, chose to be photographed with a shawl. The object, possibly a precious item brought from home, reveals a more intimate and human side amid the brutality of the American Civil War. Brothers in Arms. In the summer of 1913, half a century after the Battle of Gettysburg, former Confederate and Union soldiers met again on the same field where they had once fought with deadly fury. The Gettysburg Veterans Reunion, organized to mark 50 years since the battle, brought together more than 50,000 former combatants. Under tents and flags, men already aged, with white hair and trembling steps, greeted one another. The funeral of President Abraham Lincoln took place on April 19, 1865, on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, District of Columbia, only 4 days after his assassination at Ford's Theater. Crowds gathered in the streets of the Capitol to accompany the procession, which moved toward the Capitol where the casket was placed for public viewing. On October 3, 1862, a few weeks after the bloody Battle of Antietam, President Abraham Lincoln visited the headquarters of General George B. McClellan, commander of the Union Army. The photograph, now part of the Bettman collection, captures a solemn and tense moment. Lincoln, in his tall and austere figure, sought to evaluate the situation personally and to press McClellan. The brutality of the American Civil War, this scene from May of 1864 reveals a rare pause. Union soldiers used the North Anna River to bathe near the remains of a destroyed railroad bridge. The photograph shows not only the material devastation caused by the war, but also the human need for relief and hygiene, even on battlefields. 1865 shows a Parrott gun at Fort Totten, a rifled artillery piece used extensively by the Union during the American Civil War. Designed by Robert Parker Parrott, this kind of weapon combined power and accuracy and was able to fire explosive projectiles at long distances, an innovation compared to traditional smoothbore cannons. At Fort Totten, one of the forts that protected Washington, the conspirator Lewis Powell, also known as Lewis Payne, wearing a sweater, appears seated and handcuffed at the Washington Navy Yard in Washington, District of Columbia in April of 1865. Powell attempted, without success, to assassinate the Secretary of State of the United States, William H. Seward, at his residence on the night of April 14, 1865, the same day that President Abraham Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater. The Michigan and Pennsylvania Relief Association was an organization created during the American Civil War with the goal of providing support to soldiers and communities affected by the conflict. Groups like this gathered donations, distributed food, clothing, and medical supplies, and offered assistance to the families of combatants. The Sibley tent was a model widely used during the American Civil War, known for its conical shape and ease of setup. Created by Colonel Henry Hopkins Sibley in the mid-19th century, the structure could shelter about a dozen soldiers and had an opening at the top for ventilation, and it could be heated with an internal fire. In the final stretch of the American Civil War, controlling the movement of civilians and soldiers became a fundamental security measure in Washington, District of Columbia. This scene shows guards inspecting passes around Georgetown on the banks of the Potomac River, a strategic point for supplying and defending the capital. The headquarters of the Secret Service at City Point, Virginia, during the American Civil War, highlighting the crucial role of the institution in protection, investigation, and military intelligence at one of the main logistical centers of the Union Army. General Ulysses S. Grant, photographed in 1864 in front of his tent during the American Civil War, appears with a stern expression and firm posture, leaning against a tree in the middle of the military camp. The image reflects not only the simplicity of conditions at the battlefield, but also the determination and steady leadership of the man who would become central to the Union victory. Alfred A. Stratton, a young soldier of only 19 years of age, had his life brutally changed on June 18, 1864, when he lost both arms due to a cannon blast during the American Civil War. Despite the tragedy, he survived for another decade, passing away at 29 years of age, already the father of 2 children. A railroad bridge from the Civil War era, captured by Matthew Brady, which powerfully illustrates the strategic importance of infrastructure in that period, fundamental for the transport of troops and supplies and for the outcome of countless military campaigns. Murfreesboro, Tennessee, 1863, historical photograph showing men working to rebuild a single-track railroad soon after the Battle of Stones River during the American Civil War, a striking portrayal of the strategic importance of railroads for moving troops and supplies amid the conflict. An original example of the first Confederate printing represents a singular historical milestone, the document that formalized the moment when the first Southern state decided to separate officially from the United States of America. This record made concrete in ink and paper the break that had until then existed only as political speech and as growing tension between North and South. Savage Station, Virginia, recorded by James F. Gibson on June 28, 1862, shows a Union field hospital set up soon after the Battle of June 27 during the Peninsula Campaign. In the scene, dozens of wounded soldiers rest on improvised stretchers and on the ground under simple tents, while doctors and attendants try to organize care in the face of the enormous number of casualties. Timothy O'Sullivan, Union cavalry soldiers gather at an inn near the Cold Harbor battlefield, capturing a moment of pause amid the brutality of the American Civil War. The execution of 4 conspirators involved in the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln, including Mary Surratt, took place on July 7, 1865, in the yard of the old Arsenal Penitentiary in Washington, District of Columbia. The scene, recorded in a photograph preserved in the National Archives. A photograph taken by Alexander Gardner and preserved by the Library of Congress shows President Abraham Lincoln next to Allan Pinkerton on the left, the famous detective and founder of the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, in one of the battlefields of the American Civil War. A young Union drummer during the American Civil War, a symbol of youth drawn too early to the battlefields. These boys, known as drummer boys, did not carry weapons, but they played a vital role. Their drums guided the rhythm of marches, transmitted commands during combat, and maintained discipline in the camp. An African-American soldier of the 19th century posing beside his family, made up of his wife and 2 children. Records like this are rare and important because they document not only the presence of black soldiers in military units of the time, but also the family and social dimension of these stories. During the American Civil War, Fort Fisher was a coastal fortification located in the state of North Carolina in the United States, built during the 19th century to protect the entrance to the port of Wilmington. Its strategic position made it a key point for control of the region's maritime routes. The cannon shown in the scene was one of the main military technologies of the period used in different engagements. Today, equipment like this is kept in museums and educational events to bring the public closer to history. A medical team working in a field hospital, 1860s. The photo shows health professionals treating wounded soldiers and organizing medical care in a temporary setting near the battle line. Confederate infantry soldiers positioned themselves during a clash with Union troops in the American Civil War, United States, in 1863. The photo shows the organization of the battle lines and the use of distinct uniforms to identify the groups. This historical record helps explain the logistics and military strategy of the time. Men dressed as Confederate soldiers, United States, 1860. The photo shows individuals wearing uniforms from the era of the American Civil War. This type of clothing was used in commemorative events, historical reenactments, and local celebrations, preserving the memory of the military traditions of the period. Veterans gathered in front of the building identified as Convention Hall Market in the United States at the end of the 19th century, or the beginning of the 20th century. They appear in uniform, some with flags and banners that highlight the name of the troop and the city of origin, showing pride and a spirit of unity. 19th century, used during armed conflicts that marked the era. It is possible to observe the walls dug into the ground and the wooden structures that reinforced the space, creating an area of protection and passage for the soldiers. African American soldiers who served during the American Civil War between 1861 and 1865. More than 180,000 black men enlisted in the Union forces, forming regiments known as the United States Colored Troops. John Tyler Morgan, born on June 20, 1824, was a Confederate general during the American Civil War, and later a senator for the state of Alabama in the United States. Preserved portraits of him show the political relevance he held in the post-war period, serving in the Senate from 1877 until his death in 1907. An attack on the embassy of the United States in Saigon occurred during the Tet Offensive in January of 1968 in the Vietnam War. Viet Cong guerrillas entered the diplomatic compound in an action that symbolized the advance of resistance against the American presence in the country. In the Antietam region in Maryland, bodies of Confederate soldiers were gathered for burial after the Battle of Antietam, fought on September 17, 1862, during the American Civil War. The clash is remembered as the deadliest day in the military history of the United States, with about 23,000 casualties among dead. If you enjoyed this video and want to support the channel, please use the Super Thanks tool below. Your contribution helps us keep bringing you amazing historical content. Thank you so much for your support, and see you in the next video.